Some dogs have a really hard time being in a crate, and some dogs feel really uncomfortable wearing certain types of gear, and some dogs are not hungry in certain situations, especially when we want to train them. And that doesn't mean that the dogs are stubborn or disobedient or bad. It's just that they are processing things in a different way or have a different level of sensitivity to their environment, and they need a different approach.
Welcome to the Pet Care Report podcast by Pet Summits. Here's your natural dog healthcare host, Alora McKinley.
Well, g'day guys. Welcome back to the Pet Care Report. Now, just like each of us, our dogs are unique individuals, and it always amazes me when I have a litter of puppies just how different they all are. And so it's vitally important that I understand each individual puppy because it makes a huge difference in some of the activities I may do with them, as well as where I may place them and what type of family or activities may suit them long term. And it doesn't matter if it's a 6-week-old puppy or an 8-year-old dog. As pet parents, it's our responsibility to understand and support our dog's unique needs. And so to chat about this in terms of behavioural wellbeing, I'd love to welcome Sharon, an occupational therapist with a focus on mental health, who is also an experienced certified dog behaviour consultant specialising in treating dogs with anxiety and aggression. She founded Human Canine Collaborative, where she adopts a trauma-informed approach to help dog guardians and professionals foster better relationships and mutual well-being with their dogs. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sharon.
You're welcome, Alora. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, the term neurodiversity is something that I've heard about in humans, but not so much in relation to our furry friends. So can you explain the concept of neurodiversity in dogs?
Yeah. I'll explain what neurodiversity is just in case some of the listeners haven't heard it before. This is a term that came out of a social justice movement. In 1990, someone named Judy Singer coined the term neurodiversity to create a new category of intersectionality to support the autistic self-advocacy movement. So basically, neurodiversity helps us to recognize that every nervous system has a unique way of functioning, and there's no right or wrong way or normal versus broken or disordered way for nervous systems to operate. Every way that nervous systems operate is equally valid. And so I use this term for dogs because dogs also have diversity in the ways that their nervous systems function. And similarly to how we have a dominant socially acceptable standard of normal behavior for humans, we also have a dominant socially acceptable standard of normal behavior for dogs. For example, we assume that all dogs are going to be able to learn how to be in a crate, or able to wear collars and harnesses, or are going to like the treats that we want to give them and are going to eat the treats anytime that we want to train them. And that's just not true. Some dogs have a really hard time being in a crate, and some dogs feel really uncomfortable wearing certain types of gear, and some dogs are not hungry in certain situations, especially when we want to train them. And that doesn't mean that the dogs are stubborn or disobedient or bad. It's just that they are processing things in a different way or have a different level of sensitivity to their environment, and they need a different approach.
That makes so much sense. So then how does recognizing neurodiversity among canines help in understanding their behaviors and needs?
Well, I think it really expands our options in terms of how we can help them. You know, when we only think of dog behavior as obedient or disobedient or good or bad, those kinds of binaries are very susceptible to the reward versus punishment binary. And, you know, thinking about, well, if we want this behavior to continue, we reward it. And if we don't want that behavior to continue, then we punish it. And if we expand our perspective and recognize that maybe a dog has hypersensitivity in their nervous system to sounds or touch or smell, and that is actually contributing to a state of physiological fear or it's shifting their nervous system into a state where they aren't hungry or they aren't able to process verbal cues, then that really helps us to ask more questions about what is the dog experiencing, what is it that they need, and how can we help them to meet their needs or to feel safer or to be hungry, and so on and so on. So it really expands our repertoire and our approach to their behavior, to understanding it and to changing it.
Interesting. So then how can we as pet parents support our dogs, maybe if they are experiencing some of these things?
Well, the first thing that I recommend is to consider what your dog might be feeling. So, for example, if you're struggling with your dog's behavior and maybe your dog is reactive, maybe they bark a lot at an intense level, to everyday things, or they're pulling and lunging on the leash. You really want to ask yourself, what is the dog feeling? Could they be experiencing pain or illness, perhaps, that we're not realizing? And I think especially if a dog is having difficulty eating, a lot of people say, oh, my dog's not food motivated. That's not actually a condition that dogs can have. All dogs are food motivated. So if they're not eating in a situation where you expect them to be or where they used to eat, then we need to consider, is there something going on internally? Are they in pain? Should we get them checked out by a vet? And that step can really help you rule out underlying conditions or to start off on the right foot with the treatment that's actually going to help your dog.
And then I've heard about something called a sensory diet. Can you explain what this is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a sensory diet was developed by occupational therapists to support children with autism in being able to develop what we call adaptive behavior. So with autistic individuals, they often have various types of sensory sensitivities. And so every individual with a nervous system has a different level of sensitivity in each of their sensory organs. And this can contribute to different ways of perceiving the world, right? So like a dog who is sensitive to noises might, when there's a thunderstorm, they might tremble and want to hide and not be interested in eating or playing or training or anything like that. Or a dog who is sensitive to being touched might show aggression at the groomer or at the vet or when they're getting their nails trimmed. And so a sensory diet helps us to reduce types of sensation that are unpleasant or triggering in some way, or that are like inflaming the nervous system, while we also add in types of sensation that are really nourishing for the nervous system.
So then what kind of things make up a sensory diet?
Well, there's all different types of things. So each sensory diet is unique to the individual, but there are 4 types of sensation that are good for any dog to have as part of their daily routine. And so those include smelling things. For dogs, that's super, super important. They need to smell things in order to get information from their environment about whether or not they're safe or what resources or potential threats are out there. So finding additional ways for your dog to engage in sniffing throughout the day is going to be really helpful. Another type of sensation that's really important is movement. We don't often think of movement as a sense, but if you think about it, we can feel our arms and legs move, and we can feel whether or not we're like upside down or right side up. And if we're in a car, we can feel the car moving. Right? So that's all different types of sensation that is giving information to our nervous system about what the body is doing and whether or not we're safe. And so dogs need to engage in movement every day. And a lot of us think about that as walking or playing, which those are great. So if your dog is walking and playing, those are great types of movement. Some dogs might need more specific types of movement, which would be like structured and organized movement. Leslie McDevitt is a behavior consultant in the dog world who developed a series of exercises called pattern games. And these are all different types of ways of engaging in structured movement with your dog. So that way the dog is able to like walk past something because they have a structure for how to do it. Or perhaps they're able to like remain calm when somebody is coming inside your home because they have a structured pattern of exercises that they're able to go through. So that's really nourishing and producing safety within the body. And then the other type of sensation that's really important is deep pressure touch. And so like massage, like if your dog is asking for belly rubs, go ahead and give them some belly rubs because that's a way you're going to be able to nourish their nervous system and make sure they're getting enough touch sensation that they can feel safe and they can be able to like have their brain in the right setting to be able to pay attention and make good decisions and interact socially and things like that.
And so you mentioned that sensory diet is individual to each dog. It's not just a, one size fits all. Is that something we need to get prescribed for our dog? How do we find what fits them?
Well, if you're not sure, then definitely it would be helpful to have somebody help you to identify what types of things are really good for your dog and what types of things should your dog avoid. And I also believe, though, that dog guardians really know their dogs better than any professional could, right? So a lot of times what I do with my clients is I help them to find the own answers. Right. So I can teach them about like sensation and how the body processes that and what types of sensation they should be looking for. But the clients are the ones who can tell me like, oh, in this situation, this is how my dog reacts. Or every time that sound happens, I know that the dog is going to do this. And so it's really a collaborative effort that I use to identify the sensory diet based on like the owner's experience with the dog. And then I can help them understand what to look for and what to eliminate or what to add in.
And are there signs then that pet parents can look for that might give them a hint that their dog may benefit from a sensory diet? What should they look out for?
That is a great question. I would say a lot of people who are going to benefit from a sensory diet they're struggling with their dog's behavior and their dog isn't responding to the usual methods, right? So we're really looking at like, what are the symptoms that the dog is displaying that might indicate that they are hypersensitive to something or that their nervous system is having difficulty processing something. And that could be difficulty with eating and sleeping. Like maybe your dog has a really inconsistent appetite. Maybe your dog is free feeding because you've chosen to do that because they have such a hard time eating or you can't tell when it is they're going to want to eat. So you just leave the food out for them all the time. Or perhaps you are struggling with your dog's reactivity. The dog is like really barking at everything, every little noise that you hear outside. The dog is having a hard time relaxing and sleeping because they're jumping up every 5 minutes to bark at something. That's really a sign that the dog is not getting the rest that they need and that they're sort of like always on their last nerve, so to speak. So they're really easily triggered into that hyper arousal or that extreme fear situation.
And is this diet something that owners should be switching up daily or should they stick to a specific routine?
It really depends. A lot of dogs, especially dogs on the hypersensitive end, they really like routine. Like my dog is one of those, and he now starts to ask for the specific activities in the sensory diet. Just because he likes to have the same thing every day. And he's learned that those activities are really comfortable and feel good. But life isn't always the same, right? So our schedules change sometimes, or like this week we have a holiday coming up, or sometimes we have to travel, or big life changes happen, like the dog guardian will get a new job or have a child or get married or something. And so these things change. And so those changes in our lives impact our dog's daily routines as well. And so we want to be able to adjust the daily routine when these bigger changes are happening. So that way our dog can still get the nourishment that they need and sort of stay within their range in terms of exposure to stress or sensation.
Yeah. And in your experience, I'm just curious to know, is there like a particular age group that you see more of? Is it more older dogs that have maybe, I don't know, been through something earlier in their life, or do you see younger dogs as well?
I tend to see the dogs who have already experienced things in their lives. And I tend to have a lot of clients who have been to a lot of other people for help, and the typical strategies aren't working. But I think my approach can be really great for puppies. Puppies can come from stressful situations too. We have plenty of shelter puppies or puppies that are just more sensitive and maybe have been having a stressful time moving into their new home for the first time. And so this type of approach can really be helpful in guiding people to get to know their dogs right from the start and to develop a really strong communication with their puppy so that they can really understand their puppy's needs and communication. And then the puppy can also learn to say what they need and to listen to their own body and to develop self-regulation skills as they develop.
Yeah, self-regulation is so important, something that is really hard sometimes to work on with your puppy, to teach them, because it's not a natural thing. We have to teach them, don't we, to self-regulate.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that sniffing is a big one. What kind of things does that involve?
Oh, it can be all kinds of things. So a really simple one is like, let your dog smell things that they're asking to smell, right? Like whenever me or my partner come home from the market and we have bags, our dog wants to look inside the bag and see what's there. So we let them do that. They want to know what's in the bag. They want to know what we're carrying. And just having a lot of things come in the home and have the dog not be able to understand what those are, that can be overwhelming a little bit. So just letting the dog smell the things that they're asking to smell. Same thing on a walk. I think a lot of times it's so hard, right? Because we're trying to fit our care for our dog into our daily routine. And sometimes we only have a certain amount of time for a walk. And we also want to get exercise for ourselves. And the dog wants to stand there and smell something for 5 minutes, and it's so hard to allow them to do that sometimes. But it's also really important because they're getting information about who was here, what dogs have walked here today, what people have walked here, what's been happening around me. And the dogs might need to take a lot of time to get all the information they need to feel comfortable.
So then from your experience, what changes in behavior and well-being in dogs with a tailored sensory diet have you seen? What changes have you noticed?
Well, the big ones are better eating and better sleeping. So I worked with a client who had an 11-year-old Shiba Inu who had so much difficulty with eating that he and the owner developed so much anxiety around feeding because it was such a challenge. The dog was just turning his nose up at things and developed this really intense anxiety. And that was combined with noise sensitivity. So after we implemented the sensory diet, the dog was able to eat better, partially because his appetite returned and was more regulated because he wasn't feeling so afraid and anxious all the time. And then partly because he was able to communicate more effectively about when he was hungry. And the owner was also able to recognize the signs when he was actually hungry versus when he wanted something else. And then I remember that owner was so surprised at how much the dog was sleeping. And she was worried at first, but it was actually the dog was finally able to get the rest that he needed. And so that was a huge deal. And so then once eating and sleeping is really good, then you have a strong foundation for the other behaviors. So we saw the dog was more interactive, more social, wanted to hang out more, was able to pay attention better and learn things better. And the biggest, most rewarding change is that you can see an increase in playfulness. And that one really stands out a lot to me because play is so important for all of us, but especially dogs. Like what a wonderful gift that they have to bring to our lives is their playfulness. But if they're not feeling well and if they're feeling anxious and afraid a lot, then they're not going to be playful.
Yeah. And is there a time frame that you want to try a sensory diet to see if it's working?
I would say you should see changes right away within a few days. But you definitely want to give it several weeks. But at the same time, because the sensory diet means that you might be changing your daily routine in order to change your dog's daily routine, sometimes I build it slowly with the client. So it might take a couple of weeks to add things in or take things out until we sort of like find the just right balance. So then I would say, thinking with that, you might want to give it 2 to 4 weeks, like a couple of weeks to build the diet and then a couple of weeks to really be in it and see how it's going.
And I can imagine that varies a little bit depending on the dog and what they may be suffering or not coping with.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on the level of need. And I think you can think about it in terms of like the level of nervous system inflammation that the dog is experiencing and the severity of the behavior. And then plus like how long has it been this way? If we're thinking about like this dog has been this way for years, then we want to give a little bit more time before we expect a lot of change.
Yeah. And then is there something that we as pet parents can do? Because I know sometimes pet parents may get overly stressed or anxious if their dog is stressed and anxious, and it's just, it turns into this massive thing. What can pet parents do to help?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think is so helpful is to co-regulate with your dog. And that can be something as simple as sitting down with your dog and taking a few deep breaths, and make that part of your day to like, we just sit down together and we take a few deep breaths together. That can really help you to just slow down, and to connect with your dog and also to teach your dog how to slow down and relax and use their breath to calm their body.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And so then how does this all benefit the dog guardian relationship?
One of the things that I love about my work is that I really want to benefit both the human and the dog, right? And so when we're thinking about a sensory diet for the dog, whatever the dog is being exposed to, the human is exposed to that also. So I was talking before about Leslie McDevitt's pattern games. When you are guiding your dog through a structured movement, you are also engaging in structured movement. And so you're going to get that really nice, nourishing input through the movements that you're doing while you're helping your dog engage in really nourishing, structured movement that's going to benefit them. So it's really like you might be doing it for the dog, but you're going to benefit yourself also. Similarly, if you're adjusting the environment to eliminate sensations that are intense or triggering or fear-provoking for your dog, like, for example, maybe you are closing the blinds so that your dog isn't seeing the traffic outside your home, or you're lowering the radio or the TV, or you're lowering the lights, or you're telling people not to touch your dog because your dog doesn't like to be petted, then you're reducing all of these things that are causing your dog to be reactive. So now you're not exposed anymore to a dog who is reactive. And you also have maybe lower lighting, less visual stimulation through the window, less sound from the background noise. And that could be really soothing for your nervous system, just as it's soothing for your dog. So to answer your question, I think I see a lot less stress in the dog guardians when we take this approach.
Interesting. And just out of curiosity, if you're reducing stress in other areas of a dog's life, let's say a dog doesn't like to be touched and we're implementing all these things, is there ever a stage where maybe that dog has a change in their behavior?
Yeah, I'm thinking of my dog, Muggins. Muggins is really sensitive to touch, and we it's been like a lot of struggles for us because it comes up in social situations and it comes up with hygiene and veterinary care. And so with Muggins, we started saying no. Like anytime a stranger would ask to pet Muggins, we say no. But when it comes to hygiene care, we play games, and we added that breathing exercise and we add some pattern games to our hygiene care. And so we were looking for Muggins to be able to get the nails trimmed and get the ears cleaned and get vaccinated and those types of things. And so the additional behavior that we weren't realizing was that Muggins would start to ask for these activities. So that was what I was mentioning before, is Muggins will, like, we started doing hygiene care in the evenings as just like a way to relax at the end of the day and make it part of our daily routine so we don't have to do it all at once. And now Muggins will come to me and ask me for it, which means that I partially, like, I have a way to make sure it gets done, but it also means that Muggins enjoys this. That's why they're asking for it. And that was something I didn't actually expect Muggins to enjoy it as much as they do.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing Muggins' experience. So then what's one tip that pet parents can take away from this?
My number one tip is be curious. Always be curious. Try, like, especially in those moments when you're like frustrated and you're like, oh, my dog is being stubborn. Take a few deep breaths and recognize that it is super frustrating when your dog isn't doing what you need them to do or want them to do. And your feelings are valid. And then after you've gone through all of that, take a step back and see if you can ask questions like, why is my dog not doing this? What could they be feeling right now? Like, are they hungry? Are they in pain? What is it that they see that I don't see? Or what is it that they know that I don't? And that curiosity is really going to help you better understand what your dog might be going through and find the answers that are going to help you get the results that you're actually looking for.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a really insightful episode into understanding and supporting the behavioral well-being in our dogs. Where can our followers find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Holistic Dog Expert. You can also find me on my website. It's hc-collab.com. And if you hop on there, you can find my newsletter and join my newsletter list. You'll be able to get a free touch sensitivity quiz for your dog to find out if they're hypersensitive. And then you'll also be able to hear all of my updates and find out when I have new offers.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Sharon. It's been lovely to talk to you.
You too, Alora. Thank you so much.
And thanks so much for our listeners for tuning into another episode. Chuck us a follow or a subscribe if you found something in this episode interesting. And as we regularly have new episodes, I'm sure you'll find another one that you really enjoy. We'll see you next time.